Thank you so much, Matthew, for the intro, and greetings to everybody. Uh, so today, I'll discuss with you some processes that regulate the Gulf Stream in the Florida Straits, commonly known as the Florida Current. Today's focus is trying to demonstrate the main mechanism that control the subseasonal variations, 20 to 100 days of the Florida Current. This work is joint effort with Dennis, Sanfu, Gustavo, and Molly, and then it's been supported by the Western Boundary Time Series and XBT projects. So as we all recognize, the Gulf Stream is part of this North Tropical gyre, North Atlantic, subtropical gyre, and then it's part of this meridional opportunity circulation, or AMOC, which an important component that distributes heat, fresh water, and which is important for regulating the weather and climate with regional and global implications. And then in the Florida Straits, the Florida Current composes the Gulf Stream, and AML, in collaboration with has been at the forefront to monitor the Florida Current using a variety of methods, from cable voltage and then repeated seaport observations of drops on profilers, XBT, CPD, lower ADCPs, seaport ADCPs, and then from some bottom pressure records on each side of the straits, and then recently long track altimeter data also used to monitor the current. And many things about this Florida Current we have learned from the observations, and then many excellent papers have been published, and then I'll mention a few of them. And then, of course, a very nice one from Boringer and Larson back in 2001. It shows the complexity of the Florida Current transport based on a 16-year long of Florida Current transport estimate from the cable. And then this plot is from their paper, showing that for the first 8 years of the observation, the Florida Current transport shows this annual cycle in which it is maximum around summertime, and then it's minimum around winter time. But the second part of the observation shows a different feature, indicating year-to-year change of the seasonal cycle of the Florida Current. And then this plot also shows that the current is rich in synoptic, higher frequency variation, subseasonal variation, and so on, as you can see from this plot. And then a follow-up paper from Meinen et al., a very nice one, 2010, using a longer data set, also shares some similar conclusion, including the interannual variation of the Florida Current, or the F series, you can say. So in principle, observe Florida Current transport, or observe Florida Current exhibits pronounced variations across a wide range of timescales, from synoptic to seasonal and longer timescales. As for the synoptic scale or weather scale, the Florida Current transport, FC transport, or the FC is driven mostly by meander-like features, and then wind force processes, as documented by nice papers by Jones and Schott, and then Lee and Williams in the 80s. As for the seasonal and longer time scales, variations of the current, the baroclinic adjustments of, the interannual variation of the FC transport are mostly due to this baroclinic adjustment to the subtropical winds, well, in the forms of Rossi waves. And then one of the paper that nicely demonstrates that is from Dinizio et al. 2008. And then recently, Dong et al. Nicely link the interannual variation of the Florida current transport with that's going on over the equatorial Pacific, as we can see from this plot showing a nice correlation between the Florida current transport and the ONI index. So what about the processes that control the subseasonal variation of the Florida current? So the subseasonal period band is that, linking the weather scale to the climate scales. In principle, the subseasonal variation in the Florida current transport is quite robust. For example, a paper by Mine et al. 2010 shows that almost about 50% of the total variance of the transport is attributable to processes with time scales between 1 month to 11 months. And then another nice paper from Volkov et al. In 2020, I guess, also showed that the intraseasonal, subseasonal variation of the transport showed the largest standard deviation compared to that of a seasonal, annual, semi-annual, interannual timescale. So obviously, these intraseasonal, subseasonal variations are quite robust in the Florida current transport. But in my opinion, the underlying mechanism are not well understood, not fully understood. And then I wonder what any concurrent subseasonal changes in the MSC as well. So we propose that the primary mechanism that controls the subseasonal variation of the FC transport is coastal trough waves, which are generated in the southern mid-Atlantic bight coast. And then the waves, the trough waves propagate along the coast with the coastline to its right, and then propagate into the Gulf Coast. So for the rest of my talk, I will discuss some statistics of these subseasonal variations we observe from in Florida Straits and along the U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coast. And then I'll also discuss some properties and implication of these trough waves. And then I'll also discuss a plausible generation mechanism for these waves. And then I'll wrap it up with some concurrent subseasonal changes of the MOC in response to this subseasonal mode. So to come up with that hypothesis, we analyze an extensive set of observations in the region. So we analyze Florida current transport from cable voltage, and then we also analyze bottom pressure records on each side of the straits indicated by this deploy on each side of the straits indicated by the stars over here. And then we also analyze sea level anomalies from an array of tide gauges along the US East and Gulf Coast, as indicated by these green dots. And then in addition to those primary data, we also analyze XDP, CTD data obtained from these 9 stations across the straits in order to demonstrate this the particular structure of the waves. And then we also analyze data from rapid MoCA WTS array at node 26.5 north. And then we also analyze the satellite surface height and wind stress anomalies. So hold on. So let's first take a look at the transport estimates and bottom pressure records. A subset of the data from 2010 to 2012. So the upper panels show the transport estimates from cable, the red one, and then the green one is from the altimetry. And then the bottom panel shows the pressure records. The orange one is from the west side of the strait, or PW, and then the blue one is from the east side of the strait. And then the difference between those two is indicated by this black curve. So by eyeballing those time series, we can identify that subseasonal variations are quite pronounced in the data, particularly for that monthly variations. You can easily identify monthly variations from the data, and then on average, the subseasonal variability accounts for about 37% of the total variance, and then the fraction of the variance it explains is apparently larger than that of the synoptic seasonal interannual. So it's very I want to emphasize this subseasonal variations are quite robust in our data sets. Let me move. And then, yes, and another unique aspect of this subseasonal variability is that it is most energetic during the months of September, October, November, particularly in October. It peaks in October, as it is evident from this plot showing the monthly climatology of the standard deviation of transport estimates and press records. It's clear that the standard deviation is maximum in October, sort of indicative of how energetic the subseasonal variation is during in October. So what caused this monthly and then monthly variation that is most energetic in October? Is it local process, like local winds? Well, it looks like local winds play a minor role to drive the FC transport. So by a simple correlation, it looks like the FC transport is weakly correlated with these local wind components, and then it is the most correlated component is of course, as expected, is the meridional component, right? And then the correlation between the meridional wind stress and the FC transport is only 0.21. So using a linear approximation, it's likely that the FC transport on subseasonal timescale can be explained by this meridional wind stress. It's only 5%. The reason for this weak correlation, physical processes why the correlation is weak. I'm not sure what it is, but it looks like statistically the overall weak correlation is because the correlation is concentrated at a narrower band, shorter than 30 days, as we can see from this wavelet coherence analysis between the FC transport and the meridional wind stress. And then the correlation or the coherence is quite sporadic. It's not stationary, so that might explain the overall weak correlation. But physically, I don't know. We need to study more about what caused this weak correlation, overall weak correlation. And then another mechanism that may influence the FC transport variation on subseasonal timescale is those eddies emanating from the east of the Bahamas, and it's been suggested by Prajka Williams that published a nice paper back in 2013 showing the a correlation between eddy activities east of the Bahamas and the Florida Strait transport. They used the data between 2009 and 2009 and 2011, and showing that correlation. For the whole records, though, we find that the correlation is insignificant. So what you are seeing here is, oh, by the way, this is a figure from their paper showing anticyclonic eddy propagating into the Florida Straits. So, and then this is a simple light correlation between the Florida current transport and sea surface height anomalies at 26.5 north. And it does show clear westward propagation attributable to eddies, but the correlation is quite small. And the reason for this overall weak correlation is because, again, the FC transport correlates with the eddy sea level anomalies or sea surface anomalies for a certain period band, which is for this case, the correlation is strong for or significant for periods longer than 70 days, and then the correlation is also sporadic. It's not stationary, so that might explain the overall weak correlation between those two. The physical processes that explain this weak correlation, I don't know, but there's a nice paper by Dominguez et al. Dominguez and John, I'm not sure, back in 2018, if I recall it correctly, that these Antilles currents to the east of the Bahamas act as a barrier for this semi-permeable barrier for these eddies to transmit through the Florida Strait. So that might contribute to the overall weak correlation. Okay, so local winds and open ocean signals are probably a minor factor for this subseasonal variation. We propose that it might, the variation might have something to do with coastal or continental shelf dynamics. And to showcase that, we have a plot here showing lag correlation between the Florida current transport, FC transport, and the sea surface height anomalies from the satellite, of course. And then it's obvious that the correlation is, so the two parameters are inversely correlated, particularly within the continental shelf region. It's blue, which is a negative. And then a similar analysis between the FC transport and the sea level anomaly at the tide gauges, as indicated by these green dots, shows a similar result, which is the FC transport and the sea level anomaly is inversely correlated, which means that an increase in the FC transport would correspond with a decrease in sea level anomaly along the coast. That we can see from these two plots, from the boxes. And what these red dots indicate is the time lag. So the lags basically indicate there's wave-like propagation from the US East Coast towards the Gulf. For example, the lag at Duck Pier is positive 3 days, so that would mean that the FC transport lags the sea level anomaly at Duck Pier by about 3 days, but the transport leads that sea level anomaly at Clearwater by about 6 days. So there's sort of wave-like propagation into the Gulf. These two plots show a similar feature. The only difference is that these left panel using the data between 08 and 14 that incorporates the bottom pressure sensor at the western side of the strait. Well, this one doesn't take into account the bottom pressure sensor and then analyze the whole record between 01 and 19. Yeah, I think I forgot to mention that I focused the data between 2001 and 2019 for this analysis. So to isolate the wave-like feature from the tide gauge data, we analyze or we employ a COF analysis to the data, and then the amplitude and then the phase of the data of the leading mode of the EOF so the amplitude and phase of the leading EOF mode can be seen in this plot. So the amplitude is the blue boxes, and then the phase is the red dots. So you can tell that the wave amplitude is likely maximum around Port Canaveral, and then decays away northward and then towards the Gulf Coast. From the lags, from the phase, we can identify there is a trend of an increasing phase towards the Gulf, right? Which indicates that there is propagation from the East Coast toward the Gulf Coast. And then this leading mode accounts for over 60% of the subseasonal variation of the sea level, of the tide gauge sea level anomalies. And then the principal component of the EOF mode is well correlated with the FC transport, in which 70% of the FC transport could be explained by this subseasonal wave time series, presumably subseasonal wave time series. So to further showcase the evolution and propagation of the wave along the US East and Gulf Coast, we regress the sea level anomalies along the coast and the bottom pressure sensor records and the FC transport in Florida Straits against that the leading principal component from the EOF analysis. So from this plot, the upper plot, which shows the regressed sea level anomalies at some select tide gauge location, it is clear there is propagation from East Coast to Gulf Coast. So, for example, the wave amplitude at Duck Pier or Duck is maximum about 3 or 2 days earlier than that at Port Canaveral, and then the lag grows as we move towards the Gulf Coast, and then we can learn that on average the propagation speed is about 4 meters per second along the waveguide. And then what quite interesting here is that the phase speed along the US East Coast is roughly twice faster than that along the Gulf Coast. And then we'll discuss about that later. And then another thing we can identify from this plot is that during the wave passage, only bottom pressure on the west side of the strait that responds to the wave, while the east bottom pressure, the east the PE doesn't show any response. And so from this plot also we can learn that there's a pressure gradient and FC transport relationship of 4 centimeters per 1 sphere drop. So for every 4 centimeter pressure difference between those two pressure sensors would correspond with 1 sphere drop change in the FC transport. These plots are similar, but for extreme cases of the wave. So basically, for extreme cases, the wave amplitude at Port Canaveral would be up to 15 centimeters, and then it decays away as it moves northward and through the Gulf Coast. and then the wave crest would reduce the transport in the Florida Straits by up to 3 per draft. Yeah, and then of course, from the sea level anomalies data, we can also infer another wave feature, which is the dispersion relation. So what we are seeing here, the dots, the gray dots, are the dispersion diagram inferred from sea level data anomalies from multiple pairs of tide gauges along the coast. And then from these plots, it's clear that the majority of the dots correspond with positive wave number values, indicative of propagation into the Gulf Coast. And then we also note that the subseasonal coastal trough waves we are dealing with probably do not transmit along the waveguide as unitary wave type. So it's so the trough waves could morph from one wave type to another along their propagation. So for example, on this left panel, I'm showing you the observed dispersion diagram inferred from the data between Duck and Charleston, lined up pretty much nicely or well approximated by the theoretical dispersion curve for continental shelf waves. On the other hand, in the Florida Straits, the observed dispersion diagram is best approximated by the dispersion curve for Kelvin waves. So it looks like the subseasonal coastal trough waves behave as Kelvin waves in the Florida Straits, and then as continental shelves along the rest of the waveguide. And then in the Florida Straits, the vertical, near vertical sidewall approximation for Kelvin waves would be justifiable. I think it's because the baroclinic Rossby deformation radius in that region, particularly near the cable site, exceeds the cross shelf and slope length scale, as indicated by this plot showing the distribution of Berger number, which is basically the ratio between the deformation radius over the cross shelf and slope length scale. And so on average, the deformation radius is larger than the length, the cross shelf slope length scale by a factor of 9. That means that that coastal trough waves that transmit through the Florida Straits, particularly near the cable side, would perceive the continental shelf and slope there as a near vertical sidewall. So so I think a Kelvin wave approximation is justifiable in that part of region. And then if we recall from previous figures, we identified that the only the bottom pressure on the west side of the strait that responds to the wave passage, while the bottom pressure on the east side, or PE here, the blue curve, is just shows minor change. So that might reflect Kelvin wave model structure that should decay from west to east, with a scale of about a third of the width of the straits, which is so the decay scale is about 27 kilometers. And then if it, well, so this Kelvin wave, so from this plot, I forgot to mention that the phase speed inferred, or C, is about 2.1 meter per second. And then if we analyze the stratification in Florida Strait and then do some normal mode analysis, the phase speed for the first baroclinic Kelvin wave would be about the same speed. So perhaps Kelvin wave would be the best wave type explaining these subseasonal coastal trap waves in Florida Straits. All right. So as for the genesis of the subseasonal mode, it seems that the subseasonal trap waves are a transient response to subseasonal changes in the longshore winds. And as we can see from these plots, so these plots basically show regress wind stress, the arrows, and then sea surface height anomalies, the color. So the plots signify the evolution of sea surface height anomalies from a suppressed state, or blue, which corresponds with this southwesterly winds, right? And then the suppressed sea surface height anomalies turn into elevated state, and that state corresponds with these northeasterly winds along the coast that set up a favorable or a good condition for Ekman divergence along the coast to force the trap waves, to generate the trap waves, as we can see from these plots. So, and then the longshore winds, it looks like longshore winds correspond with these anomalous cyclonic and anticyclonic winds over the subtropics. So, for example, a train of subseasonal wave crests or subseasonal downwelling waves we saw earlier from previous figures observed along the coast and in the Florida Straits could correspond with the formation of this cyclonic wind field, whose longshore component would force the generation of the trap waves along the coast. So since the generation of these subseasonal trap waves involve changes in the subtropical wind field, we would expect some concurrent subseasonal changes in the MOC components, right? Of course, other than the FC transport, which I have shown you. So notable changes are evident, particularly for the subseasonal downwelling wave case, which corresponds with the formation of anomalous cyclonic winds in the tropic I showed you earlier. So in response to the subtropical cyclone, the Ekman transport anomaly is about 1.5 spedra to the south at 26 north, based on the rapid NOCA data set. That is partly compensated by this meager northward upper mid-ocean transport. But overall, the subseasonal change in the MOC transport is about 4 spedra, which I believe is just slightly smaller than the standard deviation of the MOC transport. So in summary, subseasonal variation is quite robust in the FC transport, accounting for about 37% of the total variance. And then it's uniquely most variable in October, and it does correspond with the period when the center of action of the subtropical anticyclone moves. So, and then the coastal trap waves are the main source of this subseasonal variation in the FC transport. And the waves could account for up to 70% of the variation. And the trap waves propagate with an average phase speed of about 4 meters per second along a waveguide between Cape May and Apalachicola. And then the wave amplitude could be up to 15 centimeters of Port Canaveral, and then rapidly attenuates northward and towards the Gulf Coast. And it looks like the subseasonal waves behave as scalping waves in the Florida Straits and propagate as shelf waves along the rest of the waveguide. And in the Florida Straits, the waves could affect the FCA transport by up to 30 spudra, which is also pretty close to the standard deviation of the Florida current transport. And the waves are alongshore wind force, and then the longshore winds are part of these subseasonal changes to the subtropical anticyclone. And the concurrent subseasonal changes of the MOC are up to 4 spudra, which also, I believe, is about slightly smaller than the standard deviation of the MOC transport based on this MOCA, rapid MOCA WTS array. So for more details, we have a paper currently under review in JGR Ocean. Stay tuned for that. And I think, thank you.